Welcome. I'm glad you're here. I'm Dr. Misty from Untamed Ember. Before we get into anything, I want to invite you to take a moment and just settle. Find whatever position lets your body be at ease. That might mean adjusting how you're sitting or lying down, or putting your feet flat on the floor if that feels grounding. There's no particular posture required here, just some version of comfortable. Take a breath if that feels available to you. Nothing forced, nothing shaped a particular way. Just whatever breath your body is already reaching for. Today, we're going to talk about something that doesn't get examined as carefully as it deserves. The difference between a rule and an agreement. And more specifically, what it feels like in the body to be living inside one versus the other. I want to start with something simple. Think of a time when you agreed to something in a relationship, a structure, an expectation, a way of navigating something together, and the agreement felt like it was yours, like you'd actually helped build it, like it had your fingerprints on it. Now, think of a time when you agreed to something that you didn't really choose, when you said yes because no felt too costly, when someone needed something clearly enough that your own answer got quiet. Those are different experiences, and your nervous system knows the difference, even when your mind is working very hard to convince you that they're the same. That's what we're going to explore today, not as a problem to solve, not as a verdict on any particular relationship, just as something worth understanding. So let me start at the beginning, because rules don't appear out of nowhere. They come from a nervous system that is scared. And that doesn't have to be bad scared, not manipulative scared, just human scared. Scared that the love they have won't survive contact with uncertainty. Scared that the territory feels too open, or too undefined, or too full of possibility in the direction of loss. When a nervous system is sitting in that kind of activation, the kind that comes with vulnerability or change or something shifting inside a relationship that matters, it starts problem solving. And almost every time, the answer that it arrives at is some version of define the edges. If I can establish what's allowed and what isn't, I can reduce the uncertainty to a size that feels manageable. If I can make the territory bounded enough, maybe I can stop running worst-case scenarios on loop. That logic makes complete sense from the inside. The impulse towards structure when you're scared is not a flaw. It's a nervous system doing exactly what nervous systems are designed to do, find safety. The problem isn't the impulse. The problem is what happens when we mistake one nervous system safety strategy for a shared agreement. So I want to introduce you to two people I'll call Mara and Dev. They're a composite that I built from patterns that show up across clinical work. They're not real people, but the dynamics are real. Mara and Dev have been together for 4 years. About 6 months ago, Dev began raising the idea of opening their relationship. Mara wasn't opposed. She had some complicated feelings, some curiosity, some anxiety, a lot of questions she hadn't fully sorted out yet. But she was willing to talk. Dev did research. He came back to the conversation a few weeks later with what he called a framework, a thoughtful, considered list of parameters. And when Mara looked at this list, she felt something she would later describe as relief. Not because the list was right for her, but because someone else had figured out what the roles were. The work had been done. All she had to do was say yes. So she said yes. But what actually happened in that conversation is worth slowing down for. Dev had spent weeks metabolizing his own anxiety about opening the relationship, running scenarios, figuring out what felt tolerable, building a structure that would allow him to feel okay. Those rules were the output of that process. They were his nervous system's architecture. And Mara had been handed the finished product and asked whether she could live inside of it. That is not a collaborative process. That's one person's internal regulation work being presented as a shared framework. Most of us didn't grow up learning to distinguish between our own nervous system's needs and what we ask of the people around us. We grew up in systems, families, communities, institutions that organized safety around compliance. You follow the structure and you're okay. You don't and you're not. Safety and behavior became synonymous, and that wiring doesn't just disappear because we decide that we want to do relationships differently. So when we come into something new carrying all of that conditioning, the first tool we reach for is a rule book. It's familiar. It's legible. It feels like something you can hand to someone and have them understand. The trouble is that what we're actually handing them is our nervous system architecture dressed up as a shared framework. So I'd like to offer you a reflection here. You don't have to do anything particular with it, just let it land. Think of a structure in your own life, in any relationship, not necessarily a romantic one, that you agreed to without really building it. It might be something you said yes to because the other person needed it clearly, or because no felt like it would threaten something you didn't want to lose, or because someone brought a framework that seemed reasonable and it was just easier to step into it than to start from scratch. You don't have to name it out loud. You don't have to even do anything with it right now. Just notice if something surfaces. And if nothing comes, that's also information. Some of us have said yes so many times that we've stopped registering it. That's worth noticing too. So take a breath and then we'll keep going. So what's the actual cost? Mara said yes. Dev was thoughtful. The list wasn't punitive or extreme. What's the real problem? Here's the thing about rules. They don't regulate your nervous system. They outsource the regulation to your partner. When Dev made the rule, tell me within 24 hours, he wasn't actually learning to sit with uncertainty. He was engineering a situation where the amount of time he had to sit with it was minimized. He was creating a mechanism that would reduce his anxiety by giving Mara the job of managing it. She became the lever he pulled to feel okay. And Mara agreed to pull the lever. And that works for a while. Compliance can look a lot like safety. As long as Mara followed the rules, Dev's nervous system got a version of what it was looking for. But here's what didn't change. Dev still hadn't learned how to regulate. His capacity to sit with uncertainty hadn't grown. The rules gave him a workaround, not a skill. And workarounds require someone to maintain them. There's something else that rules create inside a relationship, something that doesn't get named enough. They create a compliance culture rather than a communication culture. And those two things lead somewhere completely different. In a compliance culture, the operative question is, did we follow the rules? Did Mara do what she agreed to? Yes, then we're okay. The relationship is safe. We can relax. In a communication culture, the operative question is, does this still work for everyone? What's coming up that hadn't been named yet? What needs to be renegotiated? That second orientation treats the relationship as a living thing that needs ongoing tending. The first treats it as a structure that just needs to be checked for violations. And compliance cultures make it very hard to say when something isn't working, because if you're in compliance, you're supposed to be okay. There's no official channel for, I agreed to this and I'm discovering it doesn't actually fit me. So about 4 months in, Mara started noticing something in her body that she couldn't quite name. She was doing everything right. Every box was checked, but she was still exhausted. Not dramatically, just a quiet, persistent exhaustion. The kind that comes up from managing a lot of invisible labor. She was navigating something new, which takes a real emotional bandwidth, while simultaneously monitoring her own behavior for compliance within a framework that she hadn't designed. So she was doing the labor of being Mara in a new connection, plus the labor of managing Dev's anxiety through correct behavior, plus the labor of not quite being able to say that she hadn't really chosen any of this in the first place. And she was getting smaller, and the smaller she got, the more isolated she felt. Because how do you name something like that? How do you say, I agree to this, but I think I agreed because I had to, not because I actually chose it? Especially when the person who made the framework was so thoughtful, especially when naming it might threaten something both of you have worked so hard to build. The cost of that kind of retrospective dissent, when someone says yes because no felt too costly, gets paid slowly, in installments, in growing resentment, in shrinking self-expression, in compliance that becomes more and more hollow over time. And Dev's nervous system was still anxious, still churning, still running the same loop it had been running before any of this even began. Because the rules hadn't fixed anything. They'd given him something to watch, and watching is not the same as trusting. Watching is the surveillance version of trust. It looks like faith from the outside, but it's powered by vigilance. So I want to invite you to feel into a question, not think it through, but just feel it. What does it feel like in your body when you're in a conversation and your no is as welcome as your yes? Where both people are building something together, rather than one person waiting to hear whether the other can live inside what they've already decided. Notice what that feels like. Does it feel familiar, unfamiliar, possible, far away? There's no right answer here, just information about where your body holds this question. And take a breath when you're ready. What eventually cracked things open for Mara and Dev was a conversation that happened almost by accident. Dev could tell something was off, and he asked directly. And instead of the reflexive, "I'm fine," Mara said something she'd been sitting with for weeks. She said, "I think I agreed to your rules, but I don't think we actually built this together. I'm not sure the way we set this up actually has me in it." What Mara named is one of the most important things that can happen inside a relationship. She named the gap between formal consent and felt consent. Formal consent is the absence of a no. Felt consent is the presence of genuine agency, the sense that you actually participated in creating what you agreed to. Not just that someone offered you a structure and you accepted it, but that you helped build the structure and it has your fingerprints on it. Formal consent is the foundation. Felt consent is what you're actually trying to create. The conversation that followed wasn't comfortable. It required Dev to acknowledge that the architecture he'd thought was mutual wasn't. That his version of "we talked about it" had been closer to "I built it and she said yes." That his felt sense of being in this together had been partly a story he was telling himself. That's hard to hear. It can feel like an indictment, but it's also the only conversation that was ever going to change anything. Because the discomfort of a real conversation is finite. The discomfort of carrying something that doesn't fit is indefinite. So what does an agreement actually require? The first thing is that both people have equal standing, not identical needs, equal standing to bring what they actually need. Equal right to say, "that doesn't work for me." Equal right to push back on something that's already been proposed without that pushback being treated as a threat to the relationship. Equal standing is harder to create than it sounds, especially when one person wants something clearly and the other person is trying to meet them there. There's inherent relational pressure in that dynamic. The responding person's yes may be genuine, but it's rarely coming from a fully level playing field. Good agreements account for that. They don't just wait for the less powered person to push back. They actively make room for it. The second thing real agreements have is a built-in relationship to time. They're understood to be current, not permanent. They're made based on what both people know and need right now, with the understanding that right now may become different over time. Rules tend to calcify. Once they're in place, questioning them can feel like questioning the relationship itself. But an agreement that was made in one chapter of a relationship doesn't automatically know what to do with who you are in the next 2 chapters later. Real agreements expect to be revisited. Renegotiation is built in, not as a sign that something failed, but as evidence that the thing is still alive. What Mara and Dev eventually built together looked, from the outside, a lot like Dev's original framework. There was still structure, there was still check-ins, but it had different roots. Mara had helped build it. Her needs were in it. The pieces that had only been serving Dev's anxiety without actually serving the relationship had been renegotiated. And both of them knew that they could come back and change any piece of it if it stopped working. The form looked similar, the function was completely different. And the biggest difference wasn't in the framework they'd made, it was in Mara's body. She stopped feeling like she was carrying someone else's anxiety. She started feeling like someone whose experience mattered inside her own relationship. So here's the question I want to offer you, not as an accusation, not as a verdict on anything, just as an honest inquiry. Think of an agreement in your life, in any relationship, that has shaped how you show up, and ask yourself gently, whose nervous system was this made for? Did both people build it? Did both people actually have a voice? Does it still reflect what everyone involved actually needs? If the answer is yes, let yourself feel that. Notice what it's like in your body to be inside something that was actually built for everyone in it. And if the answer is I'm not sure or no, that's not a crisis, it's information. And information is the beginning of a conversation, not the end of a relationship. So just sit with whatever is true for you right now. You don't have to do anything with it yet. And take a breath when you're ready. I want to close with something simple. Your nervous system doesn't need perfect agreements. It doesn't need airtight frameworks or comprehensive contingency protocols. What it needs to know is that it has standing in the relationship, that you can bring your real hesitation, your real need, your real self to the table, and that the person across from you is willing to build with you, not just hand you something finished and ask if you can live inside it. That's what agreements are actually for, not to control behavior, not to manage anxiety through compliance, but to create enough genuine safety that everyone involved gets to show up whole. You might leave today with something clear, something you've been carrying that now has a name. Or you might leave with just a vague sense of something worth paying attention to. Both of those are enough. You're not required to arrive anywhere in particular. You don't need to have a conversation today. You don't need to change anything or arrive at any conclusion. You're allowed to just hold this gently for a while and see what it shows you. I'm Dr. Misty from Untamed Ember. Thank you for being here.